for you.
Okay, so we did Bernice Bob's Her Hair, the short story written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was he was born September 24th, 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota, to an upper middle class family. And he went to Princeton University, where he focused on his writing skills. He wrote novels and short stories, and his works were considered the paradigmatic writings of the Jazz Age. And the Jazz Age was like the Roaring Twenties, and it was a term invented by Fitzgerald. And it was a feature of the 1920s when jazz music and dance became popular. He was considered one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century, noted in his famous novels like The Great Gatsby. He was also considered a member of the Lost Generation, which was a generation during World War I of the 1920s. His writing style is comical with an understanding of the youth. For a man writing this story in the 1920s, his themes and plots are strangely relevant to today, with like similarities between Mean Girls and Bernice Bob's Her Hair, so I thought that was funny.
Yeah. So before World War I, women dressed like the Gibson Girl. After World War I, 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, a new age of women formed. Women who smoked, drank, danced, voted. They were getting rights that they didn't have before. And he introduced the flapper, which is a term he used to describe the women, lovely, expensive, and about 19.
That was a quote. He described them as that.
And women bobbed their hair and wound their chests, shortened and lightened their clothing.
Well, it was a new age. There's a new era of women coming about in the 1920s where it was described by Coco Chanel as garçon, which means little boy. And so the women were given more freedoms, like drinking and voting. And so they had this revelation. Oh, we can bob our hair, because they went from this really oppressed, super constricted clothing, with corsets and high collars, to these new, very loose, flowy, light clothing with bobbed hair, and this new outlook on life. And we can do party.
And I saw that and I was like, oh, so they're trying to be more scandalous or something. But I think it's mostly they were trying to kind of the bobbed hair was to be like the males, kind of.
It was just
less
freer,
freer, like that sort of.
So novels. Fitzgerald also wrote many famous novels. His most famous one was The Great Gatsby, written in 1925. But he also wrote The Side of Paradise in 1920, The Beautiful and the Damned in 1922, Great Gatsby 1925, Tender as the Night 1934, and The Love of the Last Tycoon, which was finished but it was published after his death in 1941. And many of his themes were about youth and promise, or age and despair.
Books that were turned into films were The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, story made into the 2008 film starring Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett. Tender as the Night, filmed in 1962 and made into a television miniseries in 1985. And The Beautiful and the Damned, filmed in 1922 and 2010. And of course, The Great Gatsby, made into mini films spanning over 90 years.
They keep making new ones.
Yes. And Fitzgerald's own life was turned into a movie in 1958, Beloved Infidel. That's just about his life.
So, marriage. He fell in love with this woman named Zelda Sayre. They were engaged, but she broke it off because finances And they later resumed their engagement after Fitzgerald's book, The Romantic Egoist, was published by Scribner in 1919 and was an immediate success. It sold over 40,000 copies, and he got a whole bunch of money for that. So they got married, and they had their only child, Francis Scotty Fitzgerald, and born October 26, 1921. Later, Zelda became ill with schizophrenia, and she later dies around 1950s.
His own death was brought by his deteriorating. Yeah.
This is a story. So he had many health problems throughout his life. He was an extreme alcoholic. He had 2 heart attacks. He had problems with tuberculosis, and he later he later suffered from a tubercular hemorrhage caused by the esophageal varices. If you're anatomy, I don't know if you know what that is. It's interesting. So the way he died was extremely dramatic, and wow. But so he was just sitting there, and he was eating a candy bar, and all of a sudden he grabs the mantelpiece, and then he gasped, and then collapsed and died. So they claimed it was from a heart attack, but I mean, I don't know exactly what that was. It could have been a combination of all of poison candy bars. But so he dies in December 21st, 1940, and he is buried in Rockville, Maryland, and on his grave is inscribed with the final sentence of the Great Gatsby. And specifically, Bernice loves her hair was written by him in 1920. First published in the Saturday Evening Post, then appeared in the collection Flappers and Philosophers. The book was based on letters he had sent to his younger sister, Annabelle, giving her advice on how to appear more attractive. So apparently he thought she needed to work on her attraction skills. So he's interested in that. And there's also mythological basis from this story. So apparently the story is similar to the myth about Queen Bernice II of Egypt, whose sacrifice of her golden hair resulted in her husband's victory in war and honor given to her by the gods. Her hair was placed into the heavens as the constellation Bernices, which means Bernice's hair. And if you finish the story, the very last scene is pretty funny and exciting. It was she just hacks off her hair and just gleefully throws it at Warren's sword, scalp the selfish thing. So just kind of similarities there. And so, discussion questions. We have 8 of them. We're going to do 4 in groups and then 4 in class as a whole.
Wow.
So, we have 5 tables. Actually, we could just do 5. Okay.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
We'll do 5 questions each table has. So you'll be 1. You guys are going to be 2. You guys are 3. You guys are 4. You guys are 5.
Oh, okay. How does she evolve? So this is pretty good. So basically, before she's awkward and
Very awkward.
it's kind of a clueless. You know, like the who's a clueless? So it's like the new look comes, they give her a makeover, and then she becomes more possible. Question 3.
Yeah, 3.
So basically, she goes from being awkward and antisocial to being popular, and then to being more popular.
During the transition, she kind of steps out and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna freaking do it. Let's do this. Let's do it. She goes out there, and then there's that moment of regret where she's like, oh my god, I actually
So yeah, basically she's really awkward and people don't oh, the boys don't like her either. She's like, why am I not
well,
attractive?
because Marjorie will like send boys to dance with her in advance, but even from the guy's point of view, they're like, all right, when can I leave? Like, she's awkward, she doesn't make good conversation, she leads when she dances, so they're not a fan of that.
She's just trying to be a man.
She starts to kind of come out of her shell because of Marjorie's tips. I begins to kind of do stuff, enjoy dancing, and having fun, and thinking of guys and all of that, especially Lauren. She starts to.
At the beginning, like, Bernice is kind of angry at, or she's upset at Marjorie for, like, making comments, like, about Bernice, like, no one likes you. And Bernice thinks to herself, she's like, oh, I must be more virtuous than these other girls who are so popular. And, like, these girls who get all these boys are, like, cheating. So, it's also, like...
And then after, she turns into this, like, she's completely just like, I do what I want.
Well, yeah, she takes it to the next level. Yeah, well, it's like she's like, yeah, she becomes more popular than Marjorie and her friends, and then they start to hate her.
And then Bob's her head, and then,
And she goes, wait, at the end, does she come off? She goes off the road.
she sleeps into her.
Yeah, she like chomps off her brain. It's so it's fine. Okay, anyway, yeah, I think we got it.
If you're in a group with me, I don't even have.
This was number, hi, we're doing number 3.
Yeah, we're talking about how, like, at the beginning she was like kind of awkward and antisocial, and then she, like, Marjorie takes her under her wing and she kind of becomes one of the popular girls, and then afterwards she like becomes more popular than them, and then she kind of like
very
right.
end, she
Yeah, and then at the very end she's. And at the end, she like they figure out that she wasn't actually gonna bother. That she wasn't.
No, they call her bluff. The
Yeah.
idea of having her hair is a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
She never does it, so you can always talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
She's
at
like,
the
I'm gonna
end, it's the words of it's what Marjorie helped her with. That helps her find her own identity.
Yep.
It seems so. Yeah, during she's a replica of Marjorie.
Yeah, she becomes like exactly like her.
After becoming a better Marjorie in Marjorie's eyes, she
Then Marjorie
Yeah,
gets
gets forced to. Yeah, but it seems like everything she learned, it helped her work to find her own identity, to find like what she.
yeah.
You
How
know,
often did you read the story?
how often once.
Every
Very
day.
thoroughly. Very, very thoroughly. And then something.
Mad lie. Sorry.
So why does she?
I just think it's weird. I just like not like that.
Want to have anything else?
Let's look at the group discussion.
Those are like 6, 7, 8.
What
The
does
hair
the...
symbolizes her own. Like,
Yeah, it kind of does.
yeah, it kind of does. But wait, no, but like once she gets up hair, they're like, you look ugly as shit. Like, what's it like the men that look bad? Isn't that part of it?
But it's also casting away this.
But it's also like her old identity, and then they go into this and you're like, I'm a girl kid. And then, yeah, I think that's like
I think it's symbolic.
yeah. And then from the start,
You can almost say like her freedom from Marjorie. It's from her coming out.
yeah. Yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, she was kind of doing this. Like, at first it seemed like her life was getting better, but then it's like she realized that that wasn't really how she wanted to be. And so then she cut off her hair, and it's like, okay, you don't have to act like that anymore. And then
From the story, what do you think of Fitzgerald's position? I feel like he's a very
It seemed like a pretty progressive story.
it's not a very
But
bad
it's
one.
not, yeah. It's not like, ooh.
Because it starts, Marjorie is the epitome of gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
She is the epitome of your typical woman at that time.
Yeah.
Proper white woman, and then the main character is
Yeah.
Bernice, and Bernice isn't pure nothing. Bernice is
No. Yeah. And it's not like, oh, I don't know, because I feel like if it was more like, if Bernice was like the caricature of like
no,
an ugly woman or something, that'd be like, whatever.
Stayed herself during the journey stage. When
Yeah.
she was getting her change, if she never bobbed her hair and just went everyone Marjorie said, it would be more of a sexist point of view.
Yeah.
So Fitzgerald,
Yeah, I'd be like, girls are all the same. They're all stupid. Like,
she doesn't conform to
No.
Marjorie's expectations for what women are like in society
Yeah.
and what these men enjoy seeing. You
Yeah.
know, like she just kind of steps away from it.
Yeah, and I think the last one was something about why the
The
story
last
was
one was why was it unresolved?
I feel like it was kind of yeah, I feel like it was resolved. It was like when she cut off Marjorie's hair, it was like she got back at her, that was the end. Yeah. It's not like you need to like, yeah.
You don't need to know whether or not
I think that was a good ending, yeah.
Circus or goes home. It's the same.
Yeah, so I think the last, like I think it was
I
fine.
don't think, yeah, I don't
I feel
think
like
it's
it
so
was,
much
I feel like it
unresolved.
wasn't, but it was.
The quote unquote resolution, the tie up,
Is when she cuts off her hair. I feel like that was like good.
It was good enough. There was nothing else we needed to add to that. It would have been superfluous.
Yeah.
My favorite is how she's like, what do you like it? And then they're just like, sure.
Yeah, they're like, yeah.
Right, like popularity.
Yeah, so there's definitely
Sure. Like, oh.
It's funny because like he
so
put this.
ready to
It says due March 6th, and he gave this today.
Yeah, we're ready. Okay.
He went on
Can
and
I
just.
have it? Are you guys ready?
We answered all of them, and we were all like, the best time.
Ready, everyone?
Close.
Do you like?
This question, how does Fitzgerald describe the girl's mindset? Do you think it's accurate?
Okay, so he describes the youth girls' mindset just by like competition, like among their like not against somebody else, but more like against their general group, I guess. And then also semi-shallow minded, like in the sense that they just care about being popular and like, oh, I'm gonna help you be popular, and it's like, oh well, it's just like your typical like movie high school kind of like yeah. And so in that sense, it's unfortunately kind of accurate, just because I mean here it's not as much, but at other schools it's definitely more prominent. So.
Well, and also like Marjorie was complaining to her mother about Bernice, and her mom's like, "What's bullshit popularity?" And Marjorie's response is like, "It's everything when you're an 18-year-old girl." And it's like she like describes it's all about the popularity and how many boys cut in on you when you're dancing, and it's like your appearance. And so she, like for like Fitzgerald to come up with those kind of standards, like I think he was probably pretty accurate in that. Because like even you can see him personally like writing a letter to his own sister saying, "You're not as attractive to men. Become like prettier and do more things." His views were kind of interesting.
And we feel like he did good. He believed that was just what had to happen for girls. There was always going to be this pressure to look their best and act a certain way. So it's not like we don't know if he personally really believed in this.
For the general.
But yeah, he just knew that this was how it was going to happen
From a story.
for the next generations.
Okay, group 2.
Okay, so basically, the relationship between Marjorie and Bernice, it evolves over time, but it starts out bad, and it just gets worse throughout the whole thing. At the beginning,
Yes.
at the beginning, Marjorie doesn't even like, want Bernice to come over to her house really that much because she's like, oh, she's not really popular enough. But yeah, it just goes down.
So the general thing is, it's like Marge wants to keep Bernice below her, but as she is already below her, she's okay helping Bernice. Bernice is her cousin, and in a way, helping Bernice makes Marjorie feel superior
It's
to
almost
her.
like
Like she is the wise and popular one, and Bernice is her subject to it being improved.
yeah, she's like the puppet master.
Yeah, it's also like wicked, where she feels justified in her kind of treatment of Bernice for doing a good deed, a charitable thing, which is in reality just helping to improve her own self-image and her own reputation.
Yeah, and justify herself, thinking about her own personality, the fact that she's seen Bernice pick these qualities up and be successful with everything, it kind of justifies, she feels good about what her personality is, Marjorie does,
Yeah.
that it's working for Bernice and everything.
But Marjorie still knows that she has control over Bernice's image because a lot of Bernice stems from Marjorie, and she, it goes. Bernice gets warned that's too far.
Yeah.
And Marjorie called Bernice bluff, and from there, like it's hard to tell how Bernice has changed by getting her hair bobbed. Something about her personality definitely changes, and that definitely flops their relationship
And
a little.
it scared Marjorie because Marjorie's whole deal is being controlled the entire time. As long as she is in complete control of the situation, she's okay with the fact that Bernice is gaining popularity and gaining just a general sense of. But as long as she is in control over Bernice, she's fine with the situation. But the moment Bernice is not in her control, then she turns back into what she was before.
Yeah, so her bobbing her hair was, her personality changed before that. Her bobbing her hair, it seems in the story that was Bernice kind of disagreeing with what.
Well, it's that moment where where she chooses that she's going to bob her hair, where she kind of came to that pressure, that changes her, and the hair bob is kind of the physical representation of that. She has changed mentally, emotionally, physically. She has changed entirely, and that's kind of the final change in their relationship. It's sort of irreconcilable. If we don't know what happens after the story, but it's as Eleanor said, that's worse.
Yeah, well, like in short, Marjorie towards Bernice, like Marjorie begins out as like the babysitter and like having all these boys look after her, and then she is the mentor for Bernice and almost like the puppeteer, like Bernice is like the Barbie doll and she's like dressing her up and making her do stuff, and then she becomes like the bully, and then later the enemy. She hacks Bernice down.
And in the end, what Marjorie did to Bernice to help her out seems to have propelled Bernice to discover who she really was, to choose to find her own identity. At first she was really stubborn about. She thought she was kind of above the other girls because she was her own self. She was more virtuous than the other girls, what she thought. So after realizing that she could change, and after listening to Marjorie and doing all that, she decided to kind of find her new identity. And then bobbing her hair was kind of breaking away from Marjorie's control. And
So number 3.
Oh, yeah.
Really what you're just saying, because especially when Marjorie seems kind of sincerely shocked that Bernice did go through with that. She didn't King she called her bluff, and she didn't succeed because Bernice does go through with it and ends up sort of strengthening Bernice where it could have hurt her.
So yeah, for our question, we started out by talking about how Bernice kind of, when she first arrived, she's pretty awkward and like kind of antisocial, and she doesn't really know how to interact with the other people, and like she just, I don't know, she's obviously not as popular as Marjorie, and Marjorie doesn't really like her, and then Marjorie decides to kind of give her a makeover, and so then after that, Bernice becomes one of the popular kids, and then afterwards, she just gets even more popular than Marjorie, and Marjorie just can't stand that. So that was kind of our like overall thing.
It's interesting. I mean, yeah. So prior to the transformation, Bernice, as Leonie said, was kind of the, I don't know, people were asked to go ask her to dance, and every person who ended up dancing with her came away rather unsatisfied.
Where they're like, the 2 by 4, I'll knock her
Or
down.
turned her like, or like you know, who was it at the beginning of the story that like flirts with her, says something.
No, it was PG Rogers or something.
It might have been someone. Regardless, someone says something along the lines of like, "You have very kissable
that
lips."
Warren.
Was that okay? That was Warren.
Yeah.
So, and her reaction to that is like completely different from what he's expecting. He's like, "Well, that wasn't really what I was saying. It was just like it was just kind of like a comment." So she doesn't really know how to interact in these kinds of situations. I don't know. To put it very basically, it's not her scene. And during the transformation, she becomes more confident. She starts to step out. There's that point where she gets back and she's danced herself to the point where she just collapses and falls asleep. Like she's so tired after a night out. But then after the transformation, as was mentioned already, she kind of steps above and out of Marjorie's like grasp, which you can also see she has like an emotional transformation, because prior to the whole situation, the moment she hears Marjorie kind of criticizing her, she cries and she's like, "Why are you doing this to me?" And there's this whole angsty, teenager-y moment where she walks downstairs and is like, "I'm not talking to you, I'm sitting in the library reading because I'm not going to talk to you," kind of thing. But then afterwards, she takes some harsh criticism and is kind of, at first, a little bit humbled, like, "I've never had someone speak to me this way before," and then it just turns full-out rebellious, like, "Oh, you're going to make fun of me for my hair? Well, let's see what people say about yours," kind of situation. So it's a very drastic change in terms of her emotional security and how she feels about herself and how she reacts to other people criticizing or talking to her in a specific way or in a certain way. So she evolves in more ways than just kind of being more social, and she's just willing to act out and do stuff like that.
And so on the lines of that question, group 4, yours was similar to that with Bernice's transformation.
Whether it's the result of a personal growth or just Marjorie's guidance.
So we can touch that. The first question is asking us whether the final transformation is in friendly and what we're talking about is that final transformation of having bobbed her hair, sort of intense jealousy of her cousin and the cutting of her braids. Whether that's internal somehow, or whether that's specifically, whether it's Marjorie's created this character, that's created this business, has created this whole system, whether this is all the cause of, this is all caused by Marjorie's.
So where do you guys think?
We felt that it was Marjorie's, I guess, fault or it was Marjorie that led her down this path, because she was just kind of like a boring person going on the same path, I guess.
Encouraging this superficiality, encouraging this obsession with
I don't know, psychologically to say that it's all Marjorie's fault. I feel like that's impossible. There has to be something that
Whoa.
Dormant's
Like
outside.
can't start from
But it was
zero.
like, it was
It's
like,
what she did that like
Marjorie was like the catalyst that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, her actions triggered the event.
Even after like Bernice's first party, and she's like later, she comes back and she's like thinking about, she's like, oh well, Marjorie did give me like this new dress and all these things on what to say, but it was me who like actually said it, me who actually danced and like laughed and talked to the people. So
Yeah, and she sought out Marjorie's help.
Yeah,
and
and-
that shows that it's her.
that shows that it's her trying to change herself and seeing that, oh maybe I don't want to be this dull person.
And Marjorie's just facilitating
some combination.
of the two, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question was, do the tips ultimately help or hurt Bernice? And I think obviously they hurt her. And the fact that she has this, like, she snaps and cuts off and she goes.
Right. Well, right. Before that, in inspiring this supplication from the people's obsession with the perception of being causes sort of vengefulness, causes it sort of cutthroat.
Yeah, definitely. She does become more confident at the very end, and I think that's due to like her like more attention towards her, and she's like realizing, like, oh, I actually am a person that can like get guys, and like that kind of her like fake confidence with like her conversations like that are made up from Marjorie almost kind of creates this like this like revenge and like a vengeful seekingness that she just goes like hacks off Marjorie's hair and like kind of frees herself from Marjorie's control.
It seems like she was always confident. That's what it looked like to me. But then she was just really stubborn about who she was before, and then she became obsessed with trying to find her own self and her own personality, and then also trying to fit into the regulations that they had on all the women at that time.
Okay, so group 5.
So, one of the major themes of the story is appearance, which you look like. Your appearance basically needs to be perfect in such a Procrustean society. She's saying that society should focus on appearance. She shows us through Bernice, once she kind of fits in by having an attractive appearance, she becomes extremely popular. And so all the other people will get kind of jealous of her because of that.
Okay, well, so all the things we came up with were competition, jealousy, popularity, betrayal, identity, and then some feminism too. And so like these beings, Fitzgerald was trying to say like society is very like superficial and especially like with youth society, and it's based a lot on appearances and how you present yourself, and it's very like on the surface, you know. Yeah.
Especially because society seems to be so focused like on trends. So like Marjorie is a beautiful girl, and so all the guys go after her. So society follows this one person. And Bernice, like she becomes like more attractive, and so all the guys
Well, it's really like changing her appearance though, because at the beginning Marjorie even says like, oh, that color's wasted on Bernice, because it's not her attraction or like her physical attraction, it's more of her personality that goes under the
personality. Okay, well, just like what's it called? Other society, just so focused on like one thing, and then you know once it goes bad or whatever, it changes quickly.
Specific combination of personality.
Okay, so then we have some group discussion, so you can get off your laptops over there. And so, what does hair symbolize in the story?
definitely symbolizes the power that I don't know that Marjorie holds over Bernice during the point in the story where Bernice doesn't have her long hair. Also, yeah,
Well,
power in general, like popularity.
yeah, okay.
He does seem to give them power. They have the power to manipulate the guys with their personality and their what they do to themselves, and then also with. Anyways, sorry, I thought that was
In a way, it just made a connection to something I was going to say about the haircut represents the personality of the person. And if, yes, you said the personality is linked to the power that they wield. So in a way, yeah, but I don't know what we're saying. Also, that the hair is power.
Well, you see how Marjorie has power over Bernice and cuts off Bernice's hair, and then at the end, Bernice cuts off Marjorie's hair, and then she has the power. So it also kind of corresponds to the historical view of when the women started to cut off their hair and bob their hair in the 1920s. It's like the flatter image, and so it was kind of like that liberation from like society's views beforehand into this new generation of women that, as like Bernice showed, like she's so much freer after that, and more confident, and do more things.
What you said about the power, the hair just kind of seeming to be power. It seems that Fitzgerald always kind of does believe that women have the power and are equal to men. It seems like all throughout. Some of this is weird with his letters to his sister and everything, but he seems to be not a feminist, but like a.
So that kind of goes to number 7.
Yeah.
Like Fitzgerald's position on the women's role in society, and his ideas are his ideas biased from a man's perspective?
Okay, well, I mean, going back to the whole idea of Fitzgerald's letters to his sister, do you know what the content of, like, specifically why? I feel like, I don't know, you could be asking your brother, or if I had a sister, like, how do I make myself more attractive to the office? Like, it could have been more of a, I don't think Fitzgerald sending letters saying, like, these are tips on how to make yourself more attractive necessitates that it was because he feels like you're not womanly enough, let me teach you my ways.
Yeah,
so like it could have very well been her asking for just his honest advice and him giving his point of view, because I feel like there are definitely points where it's a little more progressive in terms of his view on women's role in society, because there are points where, Marjorie is very much so, this is how you be a proper woman. You can't lean on the man when you're dancing. You can't talk about this stuff. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't do this. This is the epitome. This is what is the. This is what a woman should be like. This is how you attract boys. This is how you make yourself more attractive. And like, sure, she follows that, but she kind of, I feel like at points she kind of turns on it, or in the end it just ends up being like, yes, you can do all of these things, but you're also kind of a terrible person if you do. Like,
but I feel like the point that it is about like attracting men kind of makes it biased from a men's perspective. That like the entire goal is like a haircut and the popularity is for like attracting men. So that in that way it's kind of sexist, so to speak. Like, do all this and you'll like get a man. Like,
yeah.
But if it's sexist to describe something, to describe cultural attitudes, does that make Fitzgerald sexist?
But if he's saying that, like, this is how, like, oh, I guess it could be, yeah.
This is true.
it's not like he's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also, okay. Yes.
I mean, look at like a lot of different forms of media today. All of it is, a lot of it will be in Vice articles and Vice columns. A lot of women's magazines will have all of these columns. How can you be more attractive this way, or what is considered attractive? I think it's kind of the overall theme of society. Say, how can we better ourselves in whatever way that might be. So, I mean, it is possible to overthink the concept.
Yeah, it probably was just him explain to her what he knows about that just from his observations. But being a guy, he was saying, "Here, I'm helping you out, but this is all I know from a man's perspective."
Yeah, and
Because I don't know.
Well, he does give a pretty powerful role in this story. Like Marjorie and Bernice are the main characters, and Marjorie refers to the men as sad birds. Like, you gotta dance with the sad birds, and so they're like, oh yeah, you can like basically almost control the men. How Marjorie was saying, oh yeah, you should talk to the sad birds, so then you like entice the more popular boys or whatever she wanted to do.
Yeah, you're almost out of time, so I want to get to the
Sorry.
question.
Last question. Why do you think Fitzgerald ends the story unresolved?
I know.
Yeah, that's
Like,
Well, you don't know what happens to her after she
But
leaves. Like, where
is
does
it-
she go?
It's like a
Any story that doesn't end in death for everyone.
I know.
Well,
I mean,
it's
I don't feel like there's anything else that was really necessary after the point at which this story ends. Like, she cuts Marjorie's hair and runs off into the night. Like, that's kind of all we need to know. We don't need to know whether or not they got into another fist fight after that. We don't need to know whether or not she went to go live by herself with 7 cats. Like, it's not necessary information. Like, it may be, unresolved, but I feel like that is a fine resolution. I don't feel like this story really
not
needed.
every story has to end in death.
Yeah, I don't feel like it needed anything more. I think it was just enough for the story to come to a wrap and for you to feel satisfied and chuckle a little bit at the end.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, it was selfish thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, we were talking about how, like, it kind of comes full circle. I mean, like, because Marjorie kind of destroys Bernice's hair, and then Bernice destroys Marjorie's hair. It's like, okay, there's the ending. Like,
Yeah.
they both kind of got what was coming.
what we were talking about with this was that Fitzgerald, he tends to end most of his stories unresolved like this. It's how he chooses to do it. So that's just what we were talking about. I mean, this story is a little different actually. It's not as much.
Well, you do have like the question of what happens to Marjorie the next day, what happens to Bernice the next day, like where do they go, how does Marjorie react?
but I feel like if you can't really answer the question, is there anything else that I really need to know in order for it to feel like this story has come to a conclusion? Like, if there are no gaping holes in the story, I feel like it's a resolution enough. Like, that's all you need to know. She ran off, packed her stuff, took off, cut off Marjorie's hair. That's fine. We don't need to know where they went with their lives.
There's no, like,
afterwards.
epilogue.
Yeah, there's
10 years later, like,
they meet
you
again.
cut
And
my hair. I'm still mad.
neither of them grew hair ever again. Like, cursed by 7 witches. It's,
Okay, thank you.
And 7 cats. Good job, Katie.
Thank you.
See, I don't. Okay, I read the book.